Yuri, how did it happen that you came to co-author this book with Alexander Litvinenko, and why was he killed? Hello everyone, I'm delighted having today a very special guest. He is historian, KGB expert and the author of numerous books. Among them, maybe the most well-known is Blowing Up Russia from the year 2002, which he co-authored with the Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned with radioactive polonium 20 years ago in London. This picture went around the world, the bald-headed dying man in a British hospital. Shortly before his death on November 23, 2006 in London, Alexander Litvinenko addressed Vladimir Putin directly. You may succeed in silencing one man, but the howl of protest from around the world will reverberate, Mr. Putin, in your ears for the rest of your life. The actual book of Yuri Felshtinsky is called From Red Terror to Mafia State, Russia's State Security in the Struggle for World Domination. Hello, Yuri Felshtinsky. And also hello to my co-host Yuri Rashkin from Rashkin Report.
Hi everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Yuri Felshtinsky, when I heard your name for the very first time, it was when I became aware of your book Blowing Up Russia from the year 2002, which you co-authored with the spy Alexander Litvinenko. And it was all about the mysterious apartment bombings that happened in Russia those days. In 1999, a number of apartments mysteriously exploded in big Russian cities.
In 1999, the attacks were terrifyingly frequent. Previously, the city of Buynaksk in Dagestan had faced the same fate. Manezh Square in Moscow had seen explosions too. The bombings at Guryanova Street, Kashirskaya and Volgodonsk were united into a single investigation case, which was unofficially named Explosion of Residential Buildings.
And Putin was still an unknown, weak, young prime minister, not yet president, without power in Russia. And when these explosions happened in Russia, many hundreds of innocent families were killed in their homes while sleeping at night. And the official explanation those days via Russian state television was immediate: the traces lead to Chechnya. And Putin was shown on TV in a very tough manner saying, we will get these Chechen terrorists, we will get them everywhere, no matter where they are. And be it in the, and then he was using a Russian word for toilet.
We will pursue them no matter where they are, in airports, in toilets. If we find them sitting on a toilet, we'll still pull the trigger. That's all I have to say.
How do you say in Russian? Even in the outhouse.
It's slang. I mean, president shouldn't use this word.
A president should not use this word, right? And quickly after the second Chechen war started, and Putin was quickly established as a strongman. Yuri, how did it happen that you came to co-author this book with Alexander Litvinenko, and why was he killed?
Well, of course, it's a long story, so I will try to make it short. Although this is difficult. When Putin came to power, no one actually could figure out why and how this particular man became president of Russia. And technically speaking, this was legal. He was prime minister first. Then Jeltsin retired on the 31st of December 1999, very suddenly, right? Mm-hmm. And Putin became acting president first, and then through elections became president. So it was clear to me that he became a president on behalf of the FSB as a structure, as an institution. And I just started to look at Putin, how this happened, that democratic Russia, because in 1901 Russia became a democracy. The democratic Russia somehow ended in the hands of the former KGB, FSB director and KGB officer. And I started to look at the events of September of 1999. Again, this is the major terrorist act in Russia those days. This was like 9/11 for the United States of America. 300 people were killed. And Russia started the Second Chechen War, but I looked at the event and I realized that there was another terrorist act in Ryazan on 23rd of September, which just did not happen because, locals found explosive devices in the apartment basement. And I realized that all other terrorist explosions which took place were happening the same way. Explosive materials were put into the basement of the apartment houses and would explode literally in the middle of the night, very early in the morning when everybody was sleeping, to cause the major damage. The difference was that on 23rd of September, local militia arrested those terrorists. And when they arrested those terrorists, to their great surprise, they stated that they are KGB officers, the FSB officers, and that they should be transferred to Moscow immediately without any questions. And that's what happened. Those terrorists who happened to be FSB officers were sent to Moscow, and we never seen them anymore, of course, after that. But it is the same day. The same day, Russia started war in Chechnya because they knew that its rumors or information would be discovered that the bombing in Ryazan was indeed planned by the FSB. People would be able to come to conclusions that all other buildings were blown up by the FSB as well.
Yeah, that is such a horrible story when you just imagine what happened there. Somebody who was, if it was not the Chechen terrorists, which they didn't exist, obviously, if it was not them, then somebody from the FSB, maybe Putin, or for us, of course, Putin, but it was not. There's no signed document that he was. It is just evidence what we see, and
Yeah, there is no signed document, of course, but I have to say that even according to official investigation of the FSB, because they conducted official investigation, right? The terrorist act happened, 300 people were killed, you have to investigate this. And they did. But even according to their investigation, not a single Chechen was involved in bombings. They arrested some people, they named some people, but not a single of them was a Chechen. This is important. And then, of course, what is important that the war in Chechnya, the second Chechen war, started at the moment, not literally a day, the moment when those FSB officers were arrested in Ryazan, that city not far from Moscow. And, Putin knew that unless he is quick enough with starting this war will never happen, and probably everyone would know that this was the FSB behind terrorist acts. I started to write this book alone, and when it was basically mainly written, I realized that I need some answers to some questions which I might get only from Alexander Litvinenko, whom I knew in Moscow since '98. He had troubles, of course, with the FSB because he tried to broke with the system. He was put in prison. He spent 11 months in prison, and but he trusted me. I trusted him, and I knew that I could, approach him and ask him my questions. So I flew to Moscow on 23rd of September. 2000. And we met with Litvinenko. We agreed that he will help me to finish the book. We agreed that he would escape from Russia for this. So,
as Yuri Felshtinsky and Alexander Litvinenko wrote a book, FSB Bombs Russia.
He crossed the border 1 week later, and he crossed the border into Georgia. I picked him up in Georgia. In a month, he was in London. We finished the book, and 23rd of September of 2000 became my last visit to Moscow, to Russia.
Wow, yeah.
And Litvinenko, of course, as we know, was poisoned 6 years later, sorry.
6 years later, yes.
Exactly.
Exactly 6 years.
He landed in London on 1st of November 2000, and he was poisoned on 1st of November 2006.
This is a very sad story. There are many sad stories around that. I perfectly remember this time, 1999, 2000, when these stories happened about the apartment bombings. And I will tell you in a second, but I want to ask Yuri Rashkin, how did you remember this time, 1999, when you heard for the first time of those apartment bombings?
You know, that's where, Christoph, I lived, I left Russia or Soviet Union in 1988 as a child. And until about 2010 or 2011, I put Russia out of my mind precisely for the kinds of stories we're discussing here today. Because that seems like the country that was clearly back then was not headed in the right direction. And of course, had it not been for the high oil prices, they would have still been in the place where they belong, which is in the back of the line there, because they can't figure out how to do things right. They just kill people. And so I don't really have much of a recollection, because to me that was something from my past, Mm-hmm. So that this Soviet Union was something I was glad as always to my parents that they got me out of there. Yeah. That was kind of the main sentiment, because I believe that Russia is a place you cannot fix, it is a place you can leave. And therefore that was my attitude and still is.
But I wanted to know, did you realize those apartment bombings 1999?
No, I don't even remember thinking about that at the time.
There was no coverage in the United States those days about that, because in Germany it was quite a story. It was really a story. Oh, apartments blow up in the night. Nobody knows what happened, Chechens and so on. And everybody in Germany believed it was the Chechens, yes, because that was the official news from Russia coming. And the Germans always tell the official news what they hear. What everybody tells in news will be parroted here in Germany. So that's
See, Christoph, I'm an American. I can tell you where I was on 9/11.
Yeah. That's another thing, yeah.
But this is different.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear this from you, Yuri, because I wanted just to tell you my feelings when in 1999. Now I have to make the calculation how old I was. Poof! Now I'm 62, so I forget it. But I was talking to my father. My father was a pretty Russian critic man, because he was from East Germany and he fled from the Soviet Union as a young man, from the GDR, from the German so-called Democratic Republic. And he was all the time critic against Russia. And I didn't understand why he was. Now I understand why. But those days I was quite neutral in my mind. And so I told my daddy, the Chechens have blown up the apartments. And my father told me, yeah, maybe it was the Russian Secret Service themselves, the FSB. No, how could he know that? And what does he tell there? That's horrible. And then I remember in my mind I had something like, yeah, I don't know who it was. Somebody is killed. Somebody blew it up. Who was it in the end? I don't know. Nobody knows. Oh, I don't know those people. It's just bad for them, but they are dead. Sorry.
What I think, Christoph, is interesting to me is that over the last 25 years, it has become pretty widely accepted that Yuri Filshinsky's theory is like the default theory of what we more or less likely believe has happened.
Absolutely.
And I think to me, it's an interesting journey from, a single voice to a widely accepted something we treat as fact.
That is very interesting, and it raised to Yuri Felshtinsky and Alexander Litvinenko, who unfortunately was killed. But it's very important to tell the truth. This is an example that it is so important to tell the truth, even if it is horrible truth. But my point, okay.
I have to add that the book was written in 2001, and in August of 2001, it was published as a special issue by Novaya Gazeta. Novaya Gazeta was the most respected, democratic oppositionist newspaper, critical of the government very often, and specifically of the Chechen war. And so the Russian population basically knew about this book, because as a special issue they published probably 70% of the book. The entire newspaper was devoted to that book, that particular day. And not a single time actually there were any attempts by the government to disprove this theory, I have to say. And when it's very interesting that every 5 years, right, there is an anniversary of this terrorist act, of course, right? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? And you're supposed to comment this event, because again, this is a major terrorist attack in Russia. 300 people killed. Not a single time not a single Russian official, American reporter commenting the anniversary of these events claimed that this was done by Chechens. This was very interesting. Every time I was, checking TV every 5 years, and they would say, well, 5 years ago, great tragedy happened in our country, 600 people were killed, blah, blah, blah. Not a single time ever they were saying this was a terrorist act, conducted by Chechen, because not a single Russian seriously could believe this. And then in the West, of course, this was not so important, and people really kind of couldn't believe it, right? Couldn't believe that the FSB, right, Secret Service, special forces of Russia would blow up their own buildings. They believed it after 2006, I have to say. And after 2006, when Litvinenko was poisoned, the book became bestseller and was published in every major language.
But that is interesting. You say the Russians. There is widely a common agreement that it was not the Chechens and that it was the FSB who blew it up. Or is it that? Well, what you just said? Did I hear it right?
That's correct. They conducted actually those days. The Russia still was comparatively free country in terms of press, and they conducted several public opinion polls whether people believe that this was done by the FSB or by Chechens, and the majority was saying that this was done by the FSB. But this was in 1999 to 2000.
Because what I wanted to say is that a tragedy like this, done on purpose by your own government, this is just so horrible that every ordinary person should make a rebellion against that and say, away with this guy who is such a killer, such a murderer. And not only in Russia, but also in Germany and in France, everywhere. Nobody should have anything to do with this guy. And but there is, for me, the values is turned upside down. It's just now I saw it's so many people who are collaborating with the Russian government, who commit crimes and who make obviously war everywhere now. So this is, for me, and that was the beginning, 1999, and so it all started in 1999, because 1999 was a year when there was an agreement reached, unfortunately, between Jeltsin and the FSB, that the next president of Russia
would be a person from the FSB. And in 1999, they knew how they would do this. They knew that Yeltsin would resign, and the prime minister, according to constitution, would become acting president first and president later. So for this to have a successor, you would have to put this particular FSB officer as prime minister of Russia first, right? And they tried 3 people. This is very interesting, but this is actually a proof that this was not like by chance. As a KGB officer who became president of Russia, this was not by chance. This was a carefully planned operation, because they tried 3 people. The first one was Primakov, Evgeny Primakov. He became prime minister in 1999. And he was, prior to this, he was a director of the SVRs. SVR is a foreign intelligence service, a major branch of the FSB, foreign intelligence. Yeltsin did not like him, did not trust him. Yeltsin was worried about his security after he would resign. Basically, he was afraid that there might be a lot of people who would want to see him in prison for corruption, for crimes committed during the first Chechen war. So everybody, Democrats wanted to put him in prison for the Chechen war. Communists wanted to put him in prison for corruption. So Yeltsin did not trust Yeltsin. The next person was Stepashin, Sergei Stepashin, who prior to this was director of the FSK. FSK was the name of the FSB before it became the FSB. So he was from the state security as well. And Yeltsin again thought that he is too weak, that he would not be able to guarantee him that he will die, peacefully in his own bed. And the next person in line was Vladimir Putin. So I guess he was lucky for him and unlucky for us, but looking into Putin's eyes, I think he realized that this guy would guarantee his security and will never touch his family. And that's precisely what happened, by the way. Yeltsin died peacefully in his bed and his family was never touched.
Yeah, this famous first presidential ukas from Putin when he became president.
Yuri, I'd like to ask you what do you think about what happened over the last 25, 26 years now, when we have leader of FSB becoming leader of Russia? How has that developed the relationship between FSB and Russia?
Well, very, very simple. The KGB, of course, was the major state security institution, a very powerful organization, the largest one in the world, with the largest budget in the world. But nevertheless, KGB existed under the political control of the Communist Party, and they had a particular budget from the government. I mean, this was a huge budget, but this was budget. When KGB took power through the leadership of the KGB chairman, the FSB chairman Vladimir Putin, instead of budget, they have in their disposal the entire resources of the Russian state, and there is no political control over the FSB. So this changed dramatically the situation, because now the FSB not only rule of the country, but again the entire country is serving interest of this FSB, and that's why they have in their disposal unlimited resources, because the entire country is serving them. That's what the difference, and that's why it became so dangerous, and that's why there is no ability for anybody to influence the FSB, because there are no political parties in Russia. They basically do not exist. The only two structures which exist now is the FSB and the presidential administration. Presidential administration, with time, it is true, became more powerful, of course, and what they are now, it's not the same what they were in 2000. But even presidential administration actually was formed from the corpus of the FSB officers. So these are FSB officers as well, including Putin, of course, himself. And there are no other forces. And in some countries, luckily or unluckily, the army could play a political role, but not in Russia. In Russia, traditionally, army never played a political role at all. So that's why they do in Russia whatever they want. And what's very interesting and important is that we do know now from Putin's word, because he publicly explained this once at the documentary which they were making about him, that the same 5 people make a decision to invade Ukraine in 2014 and in 2022. 5 people. Putin, President of Russia, former director of the FSB, Nikolai Patrushev. At those days, he was in charge of the Security Council of Russia, former director of the FSB, and Bortnikov, who is current director of the FSB. And then, of course, Shoigu as Minister of Defense and Gerasimov as the chairman of General Staff. But mainly this decision was made by 3 KGB, FSB chairmen. Right, so this was the KGB FSB operation. By the way, the same happened a long time ago in 1980, on the 31st of December 1979, when the Soviet government made a decision to invade Afghanistan. The communists had a meeting between among KGB, the Minister of Defense leadership, and of course the Politburo was present, and the KGB was for the war, Ministry of Defense was against the war and were explaining they would not be able to win the war in Afghanistan, and the Communist Party sided with KGB and they started the war. So I wouldn't be surprised if some years from now we will find out that Russian General Staff was against the war in Ukraine, but no one would listen to them. So army doesn't play any political role in Russia. It's only KGB now.
Oh yeah, this is very interesting. Yeah. And also, as you say, I show again this book here with the numbers 1917 to 2036. And this is the end of Vladimir Putin's official presidency, so-called. And you describe the history of the KGB, which is now the FSB, and that this is a continuous situation in Russia. And that made me very much think about the speciality of the Russian state, which is, in fact, it is not a state, it is something else. How would you describe it, Yuri?
Well, it is a state, unfortunately, I have to say. It is a state, and it is a nuclear state, and this is the problem. We all know how we are afraid of.
I didn't mean it's not a state, but it's not an ordinary state as other states.
Of course, it's not the ordinary state, because for the first time in history, and this is really the first time in history, we have a state which is run by state security. This never happened before. We were dealing with political parties, with monarchy, with dictatorship, but we would never face a situation when state security is running the country and using it as its budget or as a tool for its purposes. That's why no one really understands what's happening in Russia, why these people are doing what they're doing, what they really would like to do. But what actually they would like to do is to control the world. This sounds, of course, both naive and crazy, but but they did not move very far from the famous Voltaire revolution theory, which was formulated in Russia in 1917, when, the idea was that communists would start to control the world, taking one country after another. And by the way, by the time, Stalin died, they were kind of more than halfway through after China became communist. So Russia, Soviet Union control Eastern Europe. There were enclaves of socialist states in Latin America, in Africa. Cuba became socialist, and then, of course, China. So the idea of world revolution, it was not fulfilled completely, but it was not as crazy as people would say. And that's what Putin is thinking about, his idea of destroying democracy in the world and creating a new system where Russia will be in control. But unlike Stalin or the Soviet government, who were organizing communist internationals, uniting left forces which would be ready to fight for communist revolutions or socialist revolutions. Putin actually is using every forces which are ready to damage democracy. So that's why we see that sometimes he's blocking with left forces, sometimes he's helping ultra-radical nationalist, right-wing parties, because any structure which is ready to destroy the democratic world the way we see it now, the world in which we live, is good for him. Or he would unite with any forces as long as they are ready to help him to destroy democracy.
Horrible. I just wanted to, excuse me, Yuri Rashkin, that I always speak, but you also, please speak all the time when you want. But I just have a very important statement from your book, Yuri, which is in the preface. And then you write, when the civilized world would accept a failure of Ukraine in this regional conflict, the so-called regional conflict, the gates will be wide open for an overall Third World War. With very high probability, this will be a nuclear war, and this will be the last of all wars. This is a shocking statement, Yuri, what you're doing there.
Well, let's hope this didn't happen. Meaning that the idea we know initially in 22, the plan was that Russia would take control of Ukraine very quickly. We all remember that everybody was planning that Ukraine probably will capitulate in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, that Putin made a mistake when he realized that Ukraine is not capitulating but fighting. Indeed, I have to add that everybody made this mistake. Everybody was sure that Russia will take Ukraine in a very short, blitzkrieg kind of situation.
German invention.
This will be the end. And Putin never planned to stop in Ukraine. Now he doesn't plan to stop in Ukraine as well. His plan was that as soon as he takes Ukraine, he will proceed into Eastern Europe. So, but he failed to take Ukraine militarily. The war became permanent and positional on the ground, like during the First World War, for example. And then in 1925, he was trying to force Ukraine to capitulate with the help of Donald Trump. And the entire 2025, was spent by Putin and Trump to force Ukraine to capitulate, and then failed. It's clear that Ukraine is not planning to capitulate, that Europe is not going to capitulate, and that Putin will not would not be able to take Ukraine. This is over, and that he has no ground forces for the second army to open the second front and to invade Eastern Europe. So I think the most dangerous part and period is probably behind us, except that Putin knows and Trump knows that they have only 2.5 months to finish what they want to finish.
You mean years?
And yes, I'm
years,
sorry.
Years, yes.
2.5 years. Right, because Trump presumably is going to be in the White House until January 20 and 2029. So Putin knows that after this, American policy will change. Trump knows this, and that's why these 2.5 years are going to be the most difficult and the most critical and risky.
Are you really sure that this would be the reason that Putin has only 2.5 more years? Yuri Rashkin, what do you mean? You live in the United States. Are you sure that Trump will finish his presidency? He will peacefully go away when he loses elections? Or will he make
I think that that this is a big supposition we're making, but at the same time, if Yuri's book says that Russian reign of terror is going to end in 2036, why can't we presume that America is going to have elections? I think that we're looking at some dates that I think from a discussion point of view we should have. Because I think they do help our conversation, because we have to presume that American Constitution is going to continue functioning. Just because if we presume that it's not, we're in a way surrendering to Trump already. So I think we have to kind of hang on to the assumption and the presumption and vision that we have a countdown. And continue to defend our laws. At the same time, there's a lot of different things that could happen. One of the things that I'm curious about Yuri Filshtinsky's opinion is, could we see in the United States a switch of President Trump saying, oh, I just don't feel well anymore, and retiring to some island somewhere, and Vance stepping in? Similarly, even though Constitution allows for it, but would that be similar to how Jeltsin retired and put Putin in place?
But I see it. I also want to bring my German European perspective here also, because I have the impression that Putin wants to survive somehow the next 2 years, because in 2 years, in 2029, there will be in Germany Bundestagswahl elections, and then this pro-Putin puppet party called AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, will probably be very powerful those days. I don't know why. They are rising and rising. I have my assumption it's because of Russian disinformation also, and Russian money and Russian bribery. And when those guys take over government here in Germany, as in France, the pro-Russian party Front National, Rassemblement National, will take government in France, and the pro-Russian party in England, in Great Britain, Nigel Farage's Reform UK, then Putin has won. I think so. He has to survive the next 2 years somehow, and then everything in Europe will be fine for him. The dictatorships come also in Europe. And that would be, for me and for us Democrats, of course, the most horrible catastrophe. So for me,
but so far they lost in Hungary, and this was a major and very important defeat.
Fantastic. But after 16 years of Orban.
Correct. So I believe in Europe. I have to say, I think Europe reacted bravely and very clever to Trump. I mean, I would prefer them to be more how to say, more aggressive
Yes.
with Trump, and I would prefer them not to be so polite and diplomatic with Trump. But the result is that Trump failed, and he could not force Europe to do what he wants. And I think this is a very good sign. I think
good.
Europe behave itself, almost perfectly in relation to Russian-Ukrainian war, except that they are afraid of escalation, they are afraid of nuclear escalation, they do not want this war to cross the border of Russia and Ukraine, and for this reason, unfortunately, they do not give Ukraine long-range missiles, which Ukraine needs very much, because I think that the only thing which might end this war or force Russia to end this war are strikes against Moscow. And for this, Ukraine need permission. I mean, we are dealing with, European alliance, and there should be a common front, and this decision could not be taken unilaterally by Ukrainians, but they also need long-range missiles. So as soon as Europe would give them weapons and permission to strike against Moscow, I think we have a good chance to end this war. But coming back to 2033 year, which is title of the book, this was the year on which Putin promised to be the president of Russia. And in the first edition of the book, which was 2021, we wrote that Putin has a very good chance to stay as president until 2036. And this would be longer, by the way, than any other leader in Russia, period, right? Unless he starts a major war. If he starts a major war, this would be the end of Putin, the end of his regime, and the end of Russia the way we know Russia today. And I think this war he started in 22 when he invaded Ukraine. I do believe that he started it as a major war. I do not believe he will end it. I do not, I think there is a small possibility, it still exists, that the FSB itself will take him down. I think this is possible. But it's also possible that he will stay as the president and longer and longer and longer. He personally plans to live, as we know, for the next 150 years or like this.
That is another topic, a very interesting one, that Putin wants to live forever. And he is really afraid of.
He believes that this is possible. This is also interesting. He believes that this is possible, and but seriously speaking, he's healthy. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't drink. He's in good shape for his years, and I would not count for his sudden death of natural reasons. Right.
How do you feel about strikes on Putin at this point? Are you concerned about him being in charge of a nuclear state, or, as weird as it is, or is it more important to take out Putin because even a different person in charge may want to end the war and try something different?
I think for Putin, this war became personal in many ways. So for this reason, I do not believe that he would be ready to sign any deal with Ukraine, whether this deal might be good or bad for Russia or good or bad for Ukraine. I think he wants to see Ukraine to capitulate, and this he will not see. So for this reason, he will conduct the war. The way the war is conducted now is that Russia is striking Ukraine, and this is like a one-way street, and Ukraine basically is not responding because they do not have powerful weapons for this. For this, they need long-range missiles, drones, which Ukrainians are using, are both effective and efficient, but they're not powerful enough, and you cannot take Russia destroying it using drones. And so you need missiles, and you need to strike Moscow, because Russia is a country of one city, right? So, and as long as Putin is allowed to strike against Kiev, not getting a response to in a form of strike against Moscow, he is fine. And unfortunately, this is the problem.
But this is happening now. The Ukrainians are, thanks God, able now to strike back, and so I hope that they will be stronger and finish the whole thing. We Germans here, we have really this very unfortunate past with our dictatorship with Adolf Hitler, with the Nazis. The brains of those people were completely turned around, as everybody knows. They were killing Jews, they were putting them into gas chambers, and they say all the others are guilty, and they were lying. And the propaganda of Reichspropaganda Minister Goebbels was spreading the bad news and the lies all around the world. But when a state like Russia is ruled by a secret service which is professionally lying to its people, to the world, then this must have a very horrible impact on the minds of people.
But probably because of German history, it's much easier for Germans to understand how the entire country and the entire population could live under lies and under propaganda, and could not do anything about the regime, right? The difference is, of course, and this was the difference, that for Germany this ended, of course, tragically, dramatically, tragically, but this was comparatively short period of time. Mm-hmm. And Russia indeed was democratic only 3 years in their history, from August of 91 until December of 94, when the first Chechen war started. This was the end of democracy in Russia.
Only 3 years.
And the rest, of course, the rest of the centuries of its history, Russia existed as a monarchy or dictatorship. And so the democratic experience of Russia is very, 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 very short.
Yes.
So that's why, of course, if Putin, if something happens to Putin and he's gone, yes, I believe even if we have somebody from the FSB, and I think this is what would happen, ruling Russia after Putin, still we would have a good chance to end the war, at least, right? Because that new person would not be personally responsible for the beginning of the war. In both 1914 and 1922. I'm sorry, 2014, 2020.
That would be a chance to end the war, that Putin will be gone, then the war is over. Or do you see, also a question to you both, do you see a chance that that Ukraine really wins this war and that the Russians capitulate?
I think that Putin is going to continue fighting until he's dead. I think this is pretty direct, I think that's pretty obvious. We're just watching Ukraine change the narrative and dominate and set Russia on fire. But to imagine Russia capitulating in that setting would be the person at the top had to capitulate, because who else makes the decision in Russia? Nobody. It's like one big Trump land for centuries. Mm-hmm. We don't, so I think that war is going to continue until point uncertain. Unlike Yuri, I cannot, I don't dare to give a date of 36 or 28 or who knows. In fact, sometimes it's better. It's sometimes better not to have a date and just presume that it will be going until victory, which I think is more Vitaly Portnikov's approach, which if you don't know how it's going to end. We didn't know a year ago that all of a sudden Ukraine was going to flip the scenario and dominate with drones. A year ago, situation seemed much darker than it does today, and I think Yuri's book is a kind of the statement that you read is a testament to how grim things seemed a year and a half ago. So I think that we just got to keep going in the right direction, and we'll get to the right results.
Well, in many ways, Ukraine won this war, meaning that Russia was not able to destroy the state of Ukraine. And, now we know that there is Ukraine as an independent country, that there is a Ukrainian language which is different from Russian as any other foreign language. And now we know there are Ukrainians which is in different nationality as any other nationality, right? And this, by the way, that's precisely what Russia or Putin, whatever, claim differently, right? That's how it started, right? That there is no Ukraine as an independent state. It's like a historical mistake or misunderstanding. That there are no Ukrainians because there are basically Russians who just live on those territories which are named Ukraine, and there is no Ukrainian language because actually it's kind of a dialect of Russian for those people who lived on a territory named Ukraine, right? So this is a major victory for Ukraine and a major loss for Russia. And what's also, of course, a major loss for Russia, that Ukraine, which is, by the way, a huge European country, was very friendly to Russia, was a major partner of Russia, and it's never going to be like this, right? And Ukrainians will hate Russians for generations and generations, the way Europeans were hating Germans for the crimes committed during the Second World War.
Yeah, it took 2 generations, I guess.
It's even more. I would say it's only now when Merz was saying that Germany is back and Europe kind of applauded to this statement. But it took 80 years. It took 80 years for Europeans to applaud to the idea that Germany is back. Right, and that's how long it's going to be for Russia. By the way, it's going to be 80 years from the day the war is over until Russia is pardoned or forgotten for crimes committed during this war. So and from this point of view, Russia lost dramatically, and there is not going to be respect for Russian language in Europe anymore, for Russians in Europe anymore. No one ever forgets what Russia was doing during this war, and there will be books and films and movies, and it's going to be a major problem. And in Russia, they are going to have the same problem which they had in Germany, when children will hate their parents for participating in the Second World War, or committing crimes during the Second World War. This problem Russia will only start to face after the war is over. So from this point of view, there is no way Russia is going to win this war. There is not a single possibility. There are no scenarios when Russia is winning this war. This is impossible. But the other problem is that this is a major war for Russia after the Second World War, major war for Europe after the Second World War, and it's not going to be very simple to end it and to forget it and to recover from it.
I think we may never forget the impact that this Russian disinformation and lies have on the world, which are now spread all over the world, from Russia, of course, but I see it in Germany every day. So many of my fellow Germans who have twisted minds, who don't understand that Russia is evil. and that what they are doing is to be compared what the Nazis have done also with their lives. But as we before stated, that Germany lost the war and it was turned the right way up again by the Americans, a democratic country, and now the Americans, they are flipped. Donald Trump, he is the president of the United States of America, and this guy Donald Trump is, he has. This will be another interview. I think it will be too long now to talk about Donald Trump now in full length. But so my main concern is that this poison, that this virus of lies and disinformation in the heads of people, that must be put out again somehow. And therefore, it's so great that you, Yuri, are there and you write your great books and you spread the truth. And also, both Yuris, and I'm in fact I'm a musician only. I'm not a journalist, but I'm happy that I can also tell my opinion here. And let's wrap it up now here at this point. I guess it was too interesting. I would love to speak again with you, but now I think it's
we will.
It was really nice, very interesting. Nice is something else, but it's very interesting. And thank you so much, Yuri Felštinsky, that you shared your knowledge and your expertise and your opinion here on this channel. And also Yuri Rashkin, thank you so much that you co-hosted together with me. That let's try this experiment, and we will make it trilingual now. Let me just say a phrase to my German compatriots. Dieses Programm ist hier in Deutsch und Dieses Programm ist in englischer Sprache, aber wir werden auf jeden Fall die automatische Übersetzung auf YouTube benutzen. Bitte, wenn Sie das nicht automatisch haben, drücken Sie auf dieses Zahnrad und dann können Sie die deutsche Übersetzung anhören. And now it's Yuri Felštinsky. Please say the same thing in Russian to your audience.
I think you mean me here. Yes. Друзья, просто нажмите на кнопку, и вы услышите это интервью по-русски благодаря электронной озвучке. Так что мы записали интервью беседу по-английски, но вы можете ее послушать по-русски. Пишите в комментариях, что вы думаете по поводу этого результата. Спасибо.
Very good. Thanks so much. My name is Christoph Müller. I'm the host of this channel, Talk for Ukraine. And if you liked up to here, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, also to the one of Yuri Felštinsky. Yuri Rashkin. Yuri Felštinsky doesn't have a YouTube channel, I guess. Yuri Rashkin from Rashkin Report. And it was so great having you. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you very much. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо большое. До свидания. До зустрічі.